Shalom. First and foremost, I would like to give all praises, honor, and glory to the Heavenly Father and His only begotten Son, Yahweh Bahasham, Yahweh Shai Bahasham Ha-Rachakodash. The born has been to the apostles and elders at Great Millstone who rule well, and Eftah is 100% truth. Much peace and love experience to you, hopeful. He elected the Bishnat as word of thought, truth, and sincerity. To all you Akim, I do say Shalom. I'm the Akish Shalom coming in with a quick video going into prophecy, the news, but I guess it would say outdated because it go back to like 2 to 5 days ago. Right now, I've been busy this whole month, but usually the way I structure my news is that I spend at least an hour daily scouring the web and allocating any articles that fit into this category. No, these categories. And those categories are economics, politics / governance, divine judgment, science / technology, society / culture, environment / climate, war / conflict, religion / philosophy, health / medicine, education, sports / entertainment, legal / justice. But over the years now, you've seen that there's more of a major emphasis on that of politics / governance and war / conflict, as well as divine judgment. And as to why that is because we're currently underway of biblical prophecy. Right? You see what's going on in the news, right? Which we'll get into that. But I've been busy again. I've only been able to do the news for the 7th, 8th, and 11th. But for the sake of this lesson, I'll just focus on the 8th and the 11th. But for the 8th news, 1/8/2026, on the politics / governance section, I did put how President Donald Trump has publicly stated that the United States will temporarily, quote unquote, run Venezuela following the recent U.S. military operation that captured Nicolás Maduro, asserting that Washington will oversee governance and stabilization before a transition to a new government can occur. Trump indicated that elections are not feasible in the near term and must wait until the country is, quote unquote, fixed, effectively postponing any immediate democratic process, which does remind me, back in the ancient world, what was it called? Our kings would get dethroned and other kings would be reinstated. I'm mistaken, Nebuchadnezzar did that, several times with our people. That's just what came to mind. Continuing on, I'd read, administration officials have issued mixed messages on whether the U.S. is directly governing Venezuela or exerting strong influence while working with interim leaders. But Trump's repeated comments about being, quote unquote, in charge signal a sustained U.S. role in guiding the country's political and economic direction. And second article I put, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio outlined a 3-phase strategy for Venezuela following the removal of Nicolás Maduro, asserting that the United States currently has tremendous leverage due to sanctions and control over Venezuelan oil exports, which allow it to influence outcomes in the country. Rubio said the U.S. plans to sell 30 to 50 million barrels of Venezuelan oil at market prices and control how the revenue is distributed to benefit the Venezuelan people and prevent corruption. Corruption, what was that? Yeah. Which, obviously that's not, true because as the other Apostle Rylan was going into, not his words, literally more so along the lines, the point I was trying to make out is that even though Esau could try and instill a form of justice or, from a certain plan in the end, in the long run, it comes to naught, right? Because Esau's corrupt. And it's like that scripture, never trust an enemy for, like, as iron rusteth with his wickedness. What was it called? You see his corruption manifest slowly but surely in the long term. So that's just Esau right there. Continuing on, the U.S. plans to sell 30 to 50 million barrels of Venezuelan oil at market prices and control how the revenue is distributed to benefit the Venezuelan people and prevent corruption, marking the first stage of stabilization. The second phase, recovery, aims to open the Venezuelan market fairly to American leverage stems fairly to American and Western companies and promote national reconciliation. And the third phase will be transition toward future governance. Though details are to come, U.S. leverage stems from the fact that Venezuela cannot currently generate oil revenue without U.S. approval of exports under existing sanctions and quarantine measures. Now, with with that being said, I was speaking to a friend who asked me my thoughts on, that raid on the 3rd of January, which was about 10 days ago now. And I gave her a detailed response, if you will. I'm gonna pull it out. Right. I did told her Trump launched the raid without Congress approving it because Trump's always been crazy like that. And, obviously, what's it called? We believe to the spirit that Trump is the reincarnation of Nero. And that's true. For a bit of backdrop on Emperor Nero back in the Roman Empire, he, murdered his mother, murdered his wife. And not only did he murder his wife, when he was looking for a replacement, he couldn't find none other than a male who bore, a similar, facial resemblance to that of his late wife. And if I'm mistaken, that guy's name was Sporos, the male wife, right? Sporos, meaning sperm seed. For a bit of backdrop on that guy, he got married, if you will, to a next emperor after Nero committed suicide. And after that, I forget what happened, but later in life, Sporos did end up offing himself out of shame, for his, purpose of, being the male wife. But, and also, what's it called, Trump, with his ordeals. And I forget, it was like some years ago, there was a parade where they had the likeness of Emperor Nero, compared to Trump. People in the world have speculated, what's it called? This guy's like Nero, Well, that how about that for a bit of confirmation through the spirit, which confirms the things that the men of the Lord at Great Muslim have been saying, that Trump is a reincarnation of Nero. So I guess it just makes the phenomenon a small world to know, because it's a big world, but in a sense, it's a small world because the same spirits back then, they still aren't the same today. But that goes back to Ecclesiastes 1:9. The thing that hath been is that which shall be, and there is no new thing under the sun. Right? But continuing on, he captured Maduro and took over Venezuela for oil and a limited Eastern influence. And I remember back in 2021 when the Babylonian military ended up, withdrawing from Afghanistan. Akim were doing lessons on that. And there is one video from one of the men of the Lord entitled G.O.D. G.O.D. Guns, oils, and drugs, the God of Esau. Right. And because he worships Mammon. The scripture's going to, thou shalt not worship God and Mammon. Mammon pertaining to the money. That money, he's all about that profit. He's all about that, making it rain. Because Esau's the biggest trafficker in, the earth right now. And shit, the scriptures in Genesis, the 27th chapter. Let's pull it out. It even exclaims he's about that sword. Right. Genesis 27:39. And Isaac, his father, an incarnation of Yahushai, answered and said unto him, Behold, thy dwelling shall be which dwelling, dwelling place. It means somewhere to, rest your head. Like, that really means a habitation, a home, a place to call home, a spot you live at. Behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth and of the dew of heaven from above. Really, it basically making the mention how, Esau and Eric, in the latter times, which are right now, and it's been the latter times for a while now. Esau shall inherit, friggin' earth, man. What does Babylon have with this Americanization? A lot of freaking bases across the goddamn world. Shit, you got one in Japan. Right. And even before, the Edomite subset comprising America, you had, the British Empire, and so on and so forth. Esau has been running amok for ages, man. Russian Edomites, man. They own a large chunk of Europe. Asia. Which, if I'm not mistaken, going back to like the Cold War, you know, back in the USSR, if I'm mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong on this, my history is a bit combobulated. You know, wasn't Russia, what's it called, ruling Eastern Europe, you know, which was known as like the Iron Curtain, something like that, right? So, and even if that's not the case, you know, you got the European Edomites, right? So they all over the place, South Africa, freaking, what's it called, Australia, New Zealand, and freaking, they living in Hawaii, you know, they living everywhere, dog, shit in the Americas. You know, you got some Danish colonies, I'm mistaken, in South America, right? I'm gonna search it up actually. I'm gonna search up those countries' names. Oops. Okay, so South. French Guiana and Suriname. French Guiana is a territory of France, and Suriname has Dutch roots, making them, in a sense, you know, quote unquote European. And even what's it called? What's it called? Esau rocking in the Americas, North America too. Shit, Canada. What's it called? U.S., Mexico. Hey, you know, Jake. You know, the Northern Kingdom. They ignorant to the fact that Mexico is ruled by Esau Edom, and it's been that way since, you know, what's it called, Spain, right, man. You look at the list of Mexican presidents and emperors, all of them were Edomites except for two, or probably three. You know, one of them could be a Jake, or most likely a Terra. But you know, you had Juan Benito. If I'm mistaken, his name is Juan Benito. That was literally Issachar. The second Mexican president was Vicente Guerrero. Was that his name? Vicente Guerrero. That was, if I'm saying, that was a Judite, you know, Southern Kingdom. Yeah, Vicente Guerrero. Yeah, believe it or not, man. You know, yeah. I'm saying it was Southern Kingdom ruling. President of Mexico. But other than that, you only had like two or three. I forget the other name, which, you know, I'm not really sure on. We'll see in the kingdom though. But aside from that, all presidents were Edomites, and even the current president Sheinbaum, that's a freaking, you know, that's an Amalekite. You know, what's it called? One of Esau's grandchildren's, you know, people. Yeah, still there. She's an Edomite regardless. You know, Amalek comes from Edom, right? The same way I believe I'm a Gadite, but I'm an Israelite. You know, what's it called? Sheinbaum's a Hebrew Edomite, Hebrew Amalekite. What was it called? Yeah, because, you know, they come from the land of, what's it called? They come from, if I'm not mistaken, our forefather was named Eber, right? That's where you got Hebrew from, right? What's it called? In the Hebrew is Iberia, if I'm mistaken. Yeah, so we're Hebrews, right? Continuing on, and behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth. So, yeah, you know, he's been running amok. Hey, time out to Job, the 9th chapter. Verse 24. What does it say? What does it say? If I can pull it out. Boom. The spirit landing on the page. The verse 24. The earth is given into the hand of the wicked. And who is Esau Edom known as? The wicked. Right? Malachi went in for the border of freaking wickedness. Right? You know, what's it called? You got the three classifications: the sons of God, us; the sons of the wicked, Esau; the sons of men, the other nations. Really, the other nations aren't important though. You know, it's about Esau and Jake, man. You know, it's been that way since what's it called? Going back to what's it called? You know, Cain and Abel. Right? You know, if I'm mistaken, you know, I learned from the men of the Lord at Great Millstone how Abel was a previous incarnation of, you know, our forefather Jacob, which we believe his last incarnation on this side was as King Mashah, right? And Cain was Esau. And even back to the garden, right? What's it called? Hey, you know, the incarnation of Esau was, you know, that serpent, right? What's it called? Serpent doesn't mean a physical freaking, you know, animal and shit. What's it called? Serpent can't talk. You know, all they do is slither around and make that sound. You know, pursuant to Psalms, it does make the mention, what's it called out? You know, really means I'm not a serpent for being a liar, right? Revelation 20, you know, that great old dragon, that serpent, the devil's an adversary, meaning Esau. That's a whole nother topic, another lesson right there. You know, but Esau's, you know, a serpent. Whereas, you know, our forefather Adam, you know, who married Eve, right? Because there's a distinction between Adam and Adam. Adam pertains to the Adamites, referring to mankind, and Adam being the name for our forefather, which is an incarnation of Yahweh Shai. Again, that's for another lesson, but, you know, just a bit of, you know, backdrop. Continuing on, the earth is given to the hand of the wicked. He covereth the faces of the judges thereof. If not, where and who is he, right? What's it called? Yeah, iconoclasm, and when he done more the images of the true judges, the true men of the Lord. He talked about he's a judge, and also he's the one that has sovereignty over the most of the globe. He's the one out here instilling what's they call his vain forms of judgments, but really they're perverted judgments. Is no wonder as to why the prophet Habakkuk was talking about what's it called. Therefore, the law is slacked, because it is slack, man. He was seeing what's going on this side, man. The visions. I'll pull it out. Okay, so I'm really digressing. Yeah, what's it called? Habakkuk 1 and for therefore the law is slack and judgment will never go forth, for the wicked, aka Esau, doth compass about the righteous, therefore law and judgment proceedeth. Right? You know, what's it called? He's been, you know, doing backward shit since his advent. Really. I digress, I'll continue on. Verse 40, and by the Genesis 27 and 40, and by thy sword, which, you know, that was the standard back in the ancient realm, right? You know, rocking the sword, but really don't mean in today's, in today's date, it doesn't refer to, you know, an image like this, right? Now, this is a boken, you know, it's a liking as to a sword, because back in feudal times, you know, Ammon and, you know, Jake Specklebird, you know, some of them are over there too. You know, samurai, you know, they're out there practicing, right? This is a boken. You know, but you don't see that. You don't see people walking around with that. You know, as a matter of fact, being in California law states that if you're gonna rock a sword like that, keep it in its sheath. Else, if you're gonna unsheath it in public, it's illegal and you can get arrested for that, right? You know, but what's it called? Really, the only times you see like military like that is like a ceremonial thing, right? It has to be like a royal thing too. You know, you really don't see swords. You know, yeah, sure. What's it called? Like 2 years ago, you had some Moabites. There was like a crime where police were trying to stop this Moabite with a katana, because apparently there's a conflict between her and another Moabite. What's it called? They were. You know, she tried to dash her with the katana. But you really don't see, what's it called, you really don't hear much about katanas, unless you go on YouTube searching about kendo and kenjutsu and things like that. Really, the modern standard of the sword is really the gun. And why? Because the men of the Lord back then, they dealt with the terminology of their time. You know, the Lord wasn't going to, you know, talk about, oh, there's going to be this new language called English. Else who would have heard about it? And what's it called? Now, obviously, we know prophecy pertains to things that happen beforehand, right? It pertains to what's it called, the revelation of events that happen beforehand. But not in this instance, right? You know, but the Lord wasn't going to tell us about English, and it was going to be this word called, you know, gun. Now, what's it called? That's why the scriptures are like a code. It's like a code word. It's cryptic. Right, only Jay could interpret the cryptic. You know, we speak in riddle. That's a part of our culture. You know, cryptic, the mysteries. Yahweh Shai basically made the mention. And the time after was to come and pull it out. Mysteries are given unto you, but to them it is not given. All right, so this is the book of Matthew, the 13th chapter, verse 11. He answered and said unto them, because it is given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given. Right, because, you know, these things are hard to them. Right? And even if we break it down in a simple way, you know, the actor was a cowboy and I talking about, oh my God, what are you talking about? You're happening. But anyways, I digress back. Really the modern standard of the sword is the gun. right? Because that's everybody wields that. They wield the handgun, right? It's a concealed weapon. You could have it on you for quote unquote self defense, right? So that's really what it means. And also, stereotypically speaking, what does the world think about when they think about an American Edomite? They think about some overweight, puffer fish with, shades on, a burger in his lap, a trucker cap with America on it, him on a golf cart in front of a freaking warehouse, and, it's a whole arsenal full of weapons. He has a bazooka in his arm, an M14, guns blazing, talking about America, right? What's it called? That's Esau's blessing. That's Esau's blessing. So, and my last sword shalt thou live. But I digress back. Yeah, so going back to what the Ak was saying, right? That prophet, guns, oil, and drugs. Right? What's it called? He be moving with the oil too, making that profit, that moolah with that petrodollar. And drugs too, right? So time back to what I was saying about my response on my thoughts of that raid. I said Trump captured Maduro and took over Venezuela for oil and to limit Eastern influence. And I'll tell you why. I continue on saying there's a global currency which is a U.S. dollar, and whenever a country buys/sells oil, they use the U.S. dollar, which is known as a petrodollar. If I'm mistaken, petro meaning for petroleum, right? Whereas dollar is currency, right? Money. Yeah, foreign nations have recently began using newer currencies like that of crypto, but the standard is still a dollar. Anyways, the U.S. has long sanctioned Venezuela, meaning when it sold oil, it had to use foreign currencies and not the petrodollar/US dollar. Right. Now I'm in ChatGPT and I just searched up, was Venezuela before U.S. raided them able to sell oil in foreign currencies because of U.S. sanctions? And one thing I recommend when it comes to ChatGPT usage, is to use the web feature. So because as Hakim has speculated, ChatGPT be walking in circles. It's not perfect. Right, that's why when you go to like a secular institution like a college or whatnot, professors always emphasize in their syllabus and even in a lecture, don't use AI because it walks in circles. It can talk in circles. Even if you do use it, you talk in circles, right? Your answer's gonna be wrong regardless. Even if you do try and cheat, right? But what you do is so what I recommend is you tap on that plus sign and you go on web search. It's gonna be that one with the little circle, little globe thing, and you can tell it's web search because it has like the little pop-up things, and at the very bottom it has the sources, where it got its information from. Whereas what's it called? If you don't use that, it's gonna be trying to break it down using its crappy knowledge. But ChatGPT basically meant to mention how, yes, Venezuela has continued to sell oil in foreign currencies despite U.S. sanctions, but the way it has done so has changed significantly because of those sanctions. Here's a detailed context. Number one, U.S. sanctions restricted Venezuela's access to dollars. After the U.S. imposed broad financial and oil sector sanctions on Venezuela, especially targeting its state oil company, PDVSA, Venezuela's ability to receive payment in U.S. dollars through normal international banking channels was severely curtailed because U.S. sanctions blocked Venezuela's access to the U.S. financial system, making it difficult or impossible for Venezuelan oil revenues to be deposited in conventional dollar accounts under the government's control. And thenceforth, number two, alternative currencies became necessary. To continue exporting oil and receive, and Venezuela has the largest, oil deposits in the world, more so than Saudi Arabia. Exporting oil and receiving payments from buyers, Venezuela shifted toward other currencies and mechanisms, including payments in currencies other than the U.S. dollar, such as the Chinese yuan and euro, a response to sanctions and to attract buyers outside the U.S. financial sphere. So that's a bit of clarification, right? I continue on to say, anyways, the U.S. has long sanctioned Venezuela, meaning when it sold oil, it had to use foreign currencies and not the petro/US dollar. This led to Venezuela, who has the most oil in the world, selling it for foreign currencies, with whom Eastern countries, historically known as the enemies to America, like China, quote unquote, that's the major contender right there. Which, it's not an official Cold War like it was with, with the U.S. and Russia, but You know, there's certainly that distance, that aloofness, if you will, between, you know, the Edomite subset comprising America, you know, and you know, the Moabites in China, right? Which people surmise to, you know, two ideological differences, but it's obviously more than that. You know, ideological differences pertaining to, you know, democracy and communism, which both of them are wrong, right? Shit, what's it called for us? Hey, we want a divine monarchy. You know, a divine monarchy with, you know, as a hierarchy, right? A social stratification, you call it, which is basically the social classes. You have the triangle diagram, and it has like the various tiers. Well, social stratification, you know, just a bit of jargon. Jargon means basically like, you know how you have slang, and slang is like regional. So you have like slang in Mexico, but it's coastal, and then you got another type of slang. You know, same thing with America. You know, in the East Coast they say "you're." Here in West Coast we don't, but we say "clutch." They don't over there. And then you got like in the Midwest, if I'm mistaken, they talk about John, you know, JAWN. Shit, I don't know what John wasn't taught to search it. I was talking about, oh, you got that John, and it's contextual. Same thing with that term jargon. It pertains to like work slang, if you will, work slang. Actually, I'm gonna break down the definition of jargon, because I remember the other apostle I made the mention. If you went breaking down these big words, might as well be talking a freaking air. And really along those lines again, you know, I don't try to put words in mouth. I don't try to put, you know, words in their mouth. But he was more so on the last time I what's it called, you know, keep it simple. And if you're gonna use, you know, big words, at least break the definitions down. And the other apostle Gabar is a perfect example at breaking definitions down. Right? He breaks the content down. We've always known that. But jargon basically means special words or expressions that are used by a particular profession or group and are difficult for others to understand. JARGON, jargon. So, you know, social stratification. I learned about that term in a textbook for world history, one if I'm mistaken. What was I gonna do? I lost my, yeah.